Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, paying back old debts. We're going back to World War II when Germany occupied Greece. And now Greece wants Germany to pay up. Can reparations help Greece on its road to recovery? Is anyone in Berlin listening? Also this week, pensions and insurance for all, India's noble goal to provide economic support for the old and the poor. But with such a large population, an ambitious plan like this might be a bit too much for the government's books. And the economic cost of South Africa's electricity crisis as the rolling blackouts go on, wallets and health are both suffering. So we'll start this week with the simplest economic question around. Which is the single most indebted nation in the Eurozone? It is Greece, of course. Still trying to renegotiate its $260 billion bailout, still with the threats of defaults and leaving the Eurozone. The story doesn't really change. But did you know there is a way to alleviate, even write off a big chunk of Greece's debt if, and that's a big if, Germany were to get involved? The problem is it's all about digging up the past, Second World War reparations from when Nazi Germany occupied Greece. Now, Berlin says the matter is closed. It owes nothing. Athens, though, wants it taken seriously. Now, how seriously? We're talking 160 billion euros here, which is around $172 billion. That is the estimate for wartime reparations, plus as much as 50 billion euros for loans taken from the Greek central bank back in 1943. And then this, the Distomo massacre, which Athens wants another $30 million for. It dates to June of 1944 when 3 columns of Nazi troops descended on the village in central Greece. They were executing resistance fighters when they were attacked from the hills. What followed was one of the most infamous Nazi atrocities in Greece. Soldiers went from house to house and killed 214 people. Now, to be fair, Germany has done a great deal to acknowledge its past, and as Europe's economic powerhouse, it's contributed billions into the European Union budget, $17 billion every year, in fact. That's just one of many reasons used to dismiss these reparations claims. Dominic Kane has our report now, examining Germany's economic success, but also taking a look at this question of reparations.
For 20 years, the Brenner Stahlbau has been turning out high-grade steel products. It has a staff of 57 workers and an annual turnover of more than $26 million. It is what Germans call a Mittelstand company.
We Germans have certain character traits that are at this time seen as difficult in Europe. German virtues like ambition and punctuality that make us resistant to the economic weaknesses of competing countries during this so-called crisis.
Small and medium-term enterprises like this one here in Brenner are what help to form the backbone of Germany's economic and industrial output. They benefit from business-friendly conditions and grow through exports to the rest of the European Union.
But the political opposition in Germany believes that growth here hampers growth elsewhere in Europe. They say another solution is needed.
If we think back in the past of Western Germany, then we are remembering the Marshall Plan. There was money given to West Germany to restart an economy, to strengthen the economy, and that's what we need for Europe and for Greece too.
One analyst told me it's wrong to think leaders in Berlin can compel other governments to do what they want.
All the European institutions are ineffective to force Greek government to introduce the basic structural reforms. So the German power in Europe is conditional, it has its limits, and Germany cannot do everything it would like to do.
But thoughts like that do not pacify people in Greece who say EU-imposed austerity policies have killed jobs and livelihoods. Many say Germany should still pay reparations for war debts imposed on Greece during the Nazi occupation of the 1940s. But successive modern German governments have rejected that. They see that their country pays many billions more into the EU budget every year than any other.
Well, let's get some context, historical and current, on this situation with Ulf Brunbar. He is a historian at Regensburg University in Germany, joining us via Skype. Thank you for your time, sir. I just want to start with a bit of history. Germany was given debt forgiveness back in 1953 and again in 1990 in the reunification period. Can you just give us a bit more information on those two occasions, just as a bit of context?
Yeah, sure. Well, in 1953, it was not actually total debt forgiveness for Germany, but it was an agreement between Germany and more than 20 mainly Western countries. And this agreement settled German pre-war and post-war debts, and it amounted to a haircut of around 50%. So it was not all debt that was forgiven. Actually, I think the Germany paid until 2010 for pre-war and post-war debt. But of course, it was a major favor by the Western countries to Germany, also related to the Cold War and to the important role that Western Germany played in this story. And it was very beneficial for Germany in political and also financial terms, and it helped reconstruction.
Berlin is essentially saying now, though, that this question of reparations is closed. In your opinion, is it right or wrong?
But I guess in legal terms, the German government is right. The issue of reparation has been closed by the 1999 agreement, which amounted to which actually was a peace agreement for Germany, the 2+4 agreement. It was not called a peace agreement, but in its consequences and purposes, it was a peace agreement, and this also settled all reparation claims. But there's also a moral side to the story.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about that then. Do you think there is a moral argument here, especially given the mess that Greece is in these days?
I think the difficult thing is that I think from the point of view of the Greek government, it is not such a good idea to connect the mess in which Greece is today with the issue of compensation of victims of German atrocities that took place during the occupation of Greece in World War II. And I think there is a fair argument on the side of victims and the remaining families of victims of German atrocities for compensation, because the amount of compensation that Germany paid to victims of Nazi crimes in Greece was really very modest. And here I think Germany should be more forthcoming, but this would be compensation for individuals and not money going to the Greek state.
On the flip side, is this sort of a desperate move by Greece? I was going to say a Hail Mary move almost, because of their situation, because it's so difficult in Greece and has been for so long. They're basically looking to find some money from any possible areas, and it's a bit of a desperate move.
Yeah, you're right, and I think it's not a move that does justice to the victims of German atrocities in Greece. But on the other hand, it's not new. So Greek governments for decades have been claiming that Germany must pay compensation for victims. So it's not a new thing. Of course, it gained more urgency at the moment, and the current government is pushing forward with much more sort of energy than the previous governments did.
There's a precedent I want to talk about, or actually get you to talk about and explain us a bit more, and that is Poland. Germany resolved its issues there. I mean, could that be a roadmap for Greece? Can you? Right. Well, first of all, can you explain the Polish situation, and then tell me if you think it could work?
Well, in 2000, Germany agreed to create an endowment for the compensation of slave laborers, which pertained not only to Poland but also to the countries of the former Soviet Union, and around 5 billion euros were paid as compensation payments since then. So this is a significant amount of money, and I think it really helped also to improve, settle for good the relations between Germany and Poland. And something in that direction, I think, would be not only a wise move from the German government with regard to Greece, but I think also morally right to do, because the German occupation of Greece during World War II was one of the most brutal ones, with several horrible atrocities, and therefore I think there's a moral claim.
And is that appreciated in Germany? Do you think you're saying there that the memory of World War II is so traumatic for the Greek people and for Greek society. Is that appreciated in Germany, or again, are we holding on too long? It was 70 years ago, and Germany has done a lot in that time.
Germany has done a lot in that time, but Greece always was kind of a void, also in German collective memory, because people are very much aware of what the Germans did during World War II. There's really, I think, a very sort of elaborated consciousness of guilt, but this pertains to the Holocaust, this also pertains to Eastern Europe, this pertains to Western Europe, but almost nobody knew what happened in Greece. So that's kind of fell into oblivion. And I think this is one thing that the Greeks are also very angry about. Not that anyone in Germany would deny these atrocities, but they are simply not to remember.
It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? That is Ulf Wunbauer joining us. He is a historian at Regensburg University in Germany. We thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we're staying in the Eurozone right now to look at a 3-decade EU milk quota policy which came to an end. Now, the quota was designed to ensure a decent standard of living for dairy farmers, as well as fair prices for consumers. But with the quotas now gone, the EU wants to cash in on the Asian market by exporting there. Where does that leave dairy producers in Greece? John Soropoulos looks at that.
The Volos Dairy Cooperative is booming. Recently, it invested $7 million in this state-of-the-art plant. It sells all the milk its 600 dairy farmers can produce and pays them a few cents above the European market rate per litre. But even that, its president confesses, may not now cover their costs.
The production cost in Greece is higher because of the cost of cattle feed. In Northern Europe you have green fields for more months of the year than in Greece, so their animals graze freely and feeding them is cheap. Here the animals are penned in and depend exclusively on the cattle feed the farmer gives them.
Feeding milk-producing cows is expensive. They require a high-calorie diet rich in grains. Takis Tsatsalidis rents fields to grow some of the feed himself, but now he will lose more than $20,000 a year in EU subsidies.
Before the crisis, we got 53 cents for a litre of milk. Now the going rate is more than 33 cents. Thank goodness for the cooperative. It sells us cattle feed on credit. If it weren't for them, we would have shut down.
Like Tsatsalidis, Greek dairy farmers are small-scale. They satisfy just half of domestic demand, and their market share is shrinking because many can't afford to stay in the business. Now, liberalisation threatens to wipe them out.
Northern European countries are expected to increase milk production, flooding Europe with cheaper milk. That could price Greek dairy farmers out of the competitive market that is now being fostered. But they could stand a chance in a more cooperative kind of market.
Farmers' cooperatives make no profit. They maximize returns to their members. Their markets are local and loyal and might pay more for fresher, higher quality milk than competitors can ship in. That price difference could help bridge their producers' widening competitiveness gap. So while the Volos Dairy Cooperative cannot compete in Europe, it may manage to hold its own against the coming storm.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, pensions and insurance for the poorest. India's rolling out a new program, but just how will it maintain it over the years? That story is still to come. We'll look at South Africa right now, though, where the government reckons rolling power cuts are costing the economy up to $6.8 billion a month. Which would be bad enough if you didn't add on the fact activists are saying it's hurting people's health too. Erica Wood has more on that.
This wind farm is South Africa's newest showpiece for renewable energy. The government says it wants 42% of its electricity to come from wind and solar power within the next 20 years. In the meantime, more than 3/4 of the country's electricity needs come from stations fueled by coal. But those living nearby say they're getting sick from all the polluted air.
I'm suffering from asthma.
The environmental charity Greenpeace says Katrina's symptoms are common in this area. She doesn't have access to electricity, but the district of Mpumalanga, where Katrina lives, is home to 11 coal-powered stations and another is under construction. This region is built on coal mining and coal burning, and as soon as you arrive in the area there's a real noticeable difference in the air quality. In fact, some researchers say Witbank has some of the dirtiest air in the world. Greenpeace says allowing the state-owned power company Eskom and other big polluters an extra 5 years to meet carbon emission standards could cause the premature death of up to 19,000 people.
You can't actually put a price on human health, and the Department of Environmental Affairs has clearly gone against South Africans' constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so by approving almost all of the postponements that Eskom was applying for, they really are putting the people living in those coal areas really at risk.
The Ministry of Environmental Affairs admits it didn't carry out a health assessment before it made the decision. It says it wasn't in its mandate to do so.
We all knew what we were doing. And when the applications of postponement arrives in front of us, we shouldn't be told that, no, leave those and now go and do this health study, which is not even in our purview. We're doing what our law and regulations are saying we should do.
The minister says the government has a difficult task, balancing environmental, health and economic issues to cope with South Africa's power shortage. She says her decision was based on sustainable development of the country.
Before, I was not sick. When I moved to this area, that's when I started to get sick.
But those living near its power stations believe their health is being sacrificed for the economy.
So this is a good chance to talk about some cleaner energy sources for Africa, in fact everywhere. Most of us are familiar with renewable energy, things like wind and solar power, and biomass. Okay, so you're probably not too familiar with that. Now this uses plant material and animal waste to create electricity. We're going to go to Frankfurt now and speak to Julian Uhlig. He's the chief executive of a company called N-Trade, which is making biomass generators particularly for the African market. Julian, it's nice to have you with us. Biomass generators, what are they? How do they work? And how does your company work with them? Bring it all together for us.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. Yeah, we actually developed a biomass generator that is primarily used in Africa and Asia right now, with the goal to generate on-site electricity from a sustainable biomass. This actually is a project that started over 6 years ago in Africa with a project for the German government in Ethiopia. And the goal was to really provide on-site power, which was not that easy, not using the grid at all. And so what we're doing is leapfrogging the entire infrastructure right now in the power industry to really generate on-site electricity, heating and cooling pretty much for schools, hospitals, or anyone that has ongoing electricity need.
But why would I choose biomass? You know, if we're using Africa as an example, there's plenty of sun there, there's plenty of wind in other parts of the world, renewable resources are there. Why would I go for biomass? Because if it's animal and agriculture based, I imagine it's going to require a lot of management over time.
The big advantage of biomass is that it's a power source that is actually available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not just when the sun shines or the wind blows. So whenever you're building microgrids, not using the current infrastructure, you actually always need to have a power source that is available 24/7. So exactly that part can be done by biomass, and then you use solar and wind as an additional electricity source whenever it's available. So it's not an if or, it's actually combining 2 or 3 energy sources into a reliable energy supply.
Is it expensive, Julian? Because I imagine that will be a deciding factor.
We're actually already right now, I think we can provide electricity cheaper to roughly 5 billion people worldwide than they can get from the grid, if there's actually grid power available. Anytime we compare to a diesel generator, we don't have to calculate, we always win.
Okay, can you give me some more examples of the rollout in Africa? We have done plenty of stories on this program about, and we've just done it today, power cuts, rolling power cuts, power grids not having enough reach. In fact, I remember Nigeria being a good example in that case. Tell us about what's happening in Nigeria.
Nigeria really is a special challenge because right now there is pretty much no electricity available to end consumers. So we kind of, we can't even really call it a blackout anymore because about 23 hours a day, there's simply in many areas, including Lagos, no electricity available. So the difference we have with our generators that are very easy to move and very small is that we actually build our own grid. So we can provide 24 hours, 7 days a week power supply without actually using the infrastructure on site? It is a good question, actually, to think about how the power distribution in Africa will develop over the next few years. And we believe that it's better to focus on industrialized areas to build up power grids. And actually, we can do completely decentralize the areas that are currently not serviced by the large infrastructure.
And are you managing to create jobs with it too? I always think that, well, it is the key these days. You know, it's all well and good if new technology comes along, but you've got to create employment for people.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's a huge advantage we have, and that's also why we're being funded by many government agencies right now, is we actually go in as a company, start plantation of trees in especially areas where we already have problems with the erosion. So we're actually building up our own feedstock supply over the next few years, creating jobs on site in farming, in distribution, and actually in running the machines, and therefore creating a maximum number of jobs on site and individually empowering communities, one community at a time. So I think it will actually make a huge difference on site. And right now we are looking to create a few thousand jobs in Nigeria alone, pretty much with one system operator at every site at all times. So this will seriously add up and make a difference to communities.
That is Julian Uhlig with us from Frankfurt talking biomass electricity. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Now, in India, a new pension program's been created to help out low-income earners. It is noble in the extreme, a social security initiative which doesn't exclude society's poorest. But in a country of well over 1 billion people, you have to think about whether India can actually afford this. Now, poverty in India is defined by something called the Tendulkar formula. Nothing to do with cricket. Tendulkar was a well-known economist in this case. He believed those living below 43 cents a day in rural areas and 53 cents in urban could be defined as below the poverty line. They accounted for 270 million people, or 21.9% of the population. But Tendulkar's findings were revised upwards by the former Reserve Bank governor, C. Ragarajan, in 2014. His committee changed the parameters. He upped the threshold to between 51 and 75 cents from rural to urban. That pushes a further 93 million Indians into the poor category, almost 30% of the population. The point we're making here, though, is whichever scale you want to use, there are a lot of people in India who live below the poverty line, hundreds of millions of them, in fact. Can the government fund, support and maintain these sorts of numbers in its pension program? Faiz Jamil looks at that.
Gauri started working to support her family, but never gave any thought to how she would support herself in retirement.
I didn't have any savings. I didn't know what a pension was until I started working here.
Gauri's case is unusual. That's because she was able to invest in a private pension fund with the help of her employer. But for hundreds of millions of others in India's low-paying, unorganized job sector, financial security in retirement is often not possible.
Many low-income earners rely on their children and families to support them in retirement. The government has announced its intention to launch a new pension initiative for these workers. It's not the first. Previous governments have tried to create similar programs. But fiscal experts warn the cost of running it successfully could significantly affect the national budget.
Others argue the large cost would also come with a long-term benefit.
It will keep the people who are participating in this pension scheme above poverty when they're old. And simultaneously, what it will do is it will make sure that their children will not need to support their parents when the parents are old. So the children will be able to then devote 100% of their income in supporting themselves and their own children.
Is because within about
Non-profit groups have also started private pension funds for low-income earners. While welcoming the new program, some are warning the government not to take a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to low-paid workers.
All of them have intermittent incomes, and their income patterns are different. So say a farmer earns his money twice a year. Domestic help gets good money, but she's highly portable. Today she's working for you, tomorrow she's working for someone else.
Gauri says her adult children have also started contributing to her private pension and plan to start their own. But for all those the new Social Security program is meant to cover, their lack of awareness is the biggest challenge for the government to overcome.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. can also get in touch with us by tweeting either me at Kamal AJE. There is our business editor as well, at Abid Oliver Ali, and don't forget to use the hashtag AJCTC when you tweet us. Or just drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.